My name is Karin Brown, and I am the owner of One Earth International Credential Evaluations in Madison. And unlike what Kat said, I'm not exactly an expert in this field. I don't think that anybody really can be, because it's something that is just changing all the time. And the world is changing, circumstances are changing, and information is coming to us kind of like right now as we sit here. So a lot of this is information and tools to use and apply as situations come your way. But each situation, of course, is going to be case by case and is going to be unique. So I hope that we can provide some good information to you. And a little bit about myself. So again, I'm the owner of One Earth Evaluations here in Madison, credential evaluation agency. In a former life, I was the director of international admission at DePaul University in Chicago. And before that, the coordinator of international students at the Milwaukee School of Engineering. So I'm sort of a Region 5 NAFSA lifer, and have been doing credential evaluation and formerly admission, recruitment, et cetera, for about 20 years. And I will let Zach introduce himself.
Thanks, Karin. My name is Zach Holochwost. I have been with Educational Credential Evaluators, or ECE, for almost 16 years now. I have had a background in credential evaluations. I was an evaluator for about 10 years as both an evaluator and then a research evaluator. And then I am sort of was on a bunch of different committees at EC that eventually developed the EC Aid initiative, which we'll talk about more in this presentation. So now I'm officially the EC Aid and Market Research Manager at ECE, but I still do evaluations from time to time, like right now. And let's stop talking about me and we'll jump right into this.
We have a lot to talk about. I know, and 45 minutes is not a lot of time. So bear with us. We might sort of zip through some of the slides, not super quickly. We'll try to go through and give you, all of the pertinent information you need, but we might save the discussion part of it until towards the end, just to make sure that we get through the slides and the information that we have to give you. And we'll start with Zach, who's going to talk a little bit about refugees in general and some statistics in Wisconsin. We'll look at sort of some alternative methods of assessment, some challenges that refugees face, particularly with documentation, some alternative methods of assessment that you could utilize.
Sir?
And then we'll give you a bunch of resources that you can use and apply at your institution. So I'll let Zach take it away.
Thanks, Karin. So just to get some of the general definitions out of the way. Refugees, a lot of the term is kind of overused a lot, and it really, for the most part, a refugee is really someone who's going to be fleeing from war, conflict, environmental disasters, anything like that, and crossing over an international border. That's sort of the definition of a refugee, is they are crossing over an international border. Asylum seekers are also, they're seeking protection from war and conflict and persecution, but they're not necessarily crossing over a border from the very get-go. And how we kind of differentiate them is, it's what we like to say is that not every asylum seeker will ultimately be recognized as a refugee, but every refugee was initially an asylum seeker. So that's sort of how we kind of differentiate between that. And then IDPs are internally displaced persons. That is by far the vast majority of people who have been displaced throughout the world. And what an IDP is someone who has fled their home because of conflict or persecution, but they have remained within their country's borders. So they haven't crossed over that international border yet, but they're not at their own home. And it could be in a camp or elsewhere. This next slide is sort of the really depressing one, because it's really massive amounts of numbers. And I think the what we'd like to kind of focus on, or what we focus on a little bit more, is those on the right side, the 26 million refugees worldwide. But as you can see, with 84 million people right now, and more than that, who have been forcibly displaced, that number just continues to rise every year, and there's a lot of work to do. And so it's hard to comprehend numbers this large, and so I think it's important to always take a step back and, you know, understand that helping one person at a time is really what organizations like ours can do. It's really tough to try to think of systemic changes on such a huge level. And again, as you can see, out of those 84 million, 48 million are internally displaced, 35 million under the age of 18. So you have a lot of kids who are in refugee camps or have been internally displaced or are living elsewhere. And so education comes into play. And this is what we're going to talk about, is the, you know, how we can help people access quality education, or through, if they've been through school, how we can help them, you know, find a good job or continuing education outside of wherever they have come from. And of course, the big number right now is Afghanistan with 2.6 million out of, but, you know, this is, you know, the numbers continue to grow and it changes every year. So for the US response to Afghanistan, the Department of Homeland Security started a program specifically for the Afghan refugees called Operation Allies Welcome. So last year, when you're hearing all the news of refugees going to military bases, that was part of the Operation Allies Welcome. And as you can see on this map, that's sort of where the main, you know, sort of how many of the Afghan refugees ended up being placed in certain states. California and Texas were huge in resettling Afghan refugees. As of February, there are no longer anybody is on any military bases, maybe just like a handful here and there. But we've ultimately, our country was able to resettle 76 or over 76,000 Afghan nationals within US communities. So they are now in our communities and they have their 90 days to find a job. And hopefully we can kind of help facilitate some of that stuff. So in Wisconsin, since the 70s, we've resettled more than 75,000 refugees, and 2/3 of those refugees since 2000 have ended up in Milwaukee County. Obviously, with a large metro center, it's easier to resettle folks there, but there's quite a few in Appleton. Wausau is resettling folks, Green Bay area, Madison. So really our sort of major city areas in Wisconsin are where a lot of the folks are ending up. The largest right now, or as of you know, last year before Afghanistan, the largest resettled refugees in Wisconsin were mainly Hmong, Burmese, Somali, Bosnian, and Iraqis, but it shifts around. And after this year with Ukraine, we'll see kind of where that number is at. And these statistics can all be found through the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families, through the Bureau of Refugee Programs. They have lots of great statistics year by year on their website. Specifically then with Afghanistan in Wisconsin, there were nearly 13,000 refugees that were at Fort McCoy. Only about 180 of those refugees ended up staying in Wisconsin. The rest were resettled elsewhere. So out of the 850 or so Afghan refugees that were resettled in Wisconsin, they were mainly coming from a different base, likely Fort Dix in New Jersey or elsewhere. But 400 Afghans were resettled in Milwaukee, 200 in Appleton, 125 in Green Bay, 75 Wausau, and 50 in Madison. And that tends to be, as you'll see later on with what agencies are working in Wisconsin to resettle refugees, you'll see that that's basically where they're based out of, is these main hubs in cities. And now I'll turn it over to Karin to talk a little bit about credential validation.
Okay, thanks, Zach. All right, so the goal of admissions, as you all know who are in admissions, is to attract and admit qualified applicants who are able to matriculate and graduate. And the goal of credential evaluation as part of that process is really to maintain the integrity of that admission process, ensuring thorough, efficient, and consistent evaluation of credentials. Part of maintaining the integrity of that process is to determining the eligibility of your applicants is to adhere to strict documentation policies to ensure that the decision that you're making is based on not only correct credentials, but also authentic ones. So ideally, right, you would ask a candidate or an applicant for their official academic credentials, right? And ideally you would get like a sealed envelope transcript from their university sent by the registrar, or their IGCSE results that you can easily verify on CIE Direct, right? And then you know that the credentials are authentic, that the person is eligible, easy peasy, students admitted. But that's not always the case. And particularly with this population of students, sometimes you need to not only modify, but kind of throw out all of these requirements that are usually needed for applicants because the documentation may simply not exist or be very difficult to obtain. Before we even get to the documentation challenges, there's just a whole number of other challenges that refugees and displaced persons might face in their home country or their host country. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You know, like the furthering their education may be further down the line than sort of the initial safety and security, physical shelter, food, you know, those kind of things. So there are all kinds of other logistical barriers, including, you know, lack of language proficiency, transportation, other costs that might be involved to even get to your institution, let alone the tuition costs. So there are several barriers that these applicants might face along the way. I just want to highlight two things in particular at the bottom here, the assumption that their education won't count. I hear this more often than I'd like to, I think. You know, I always say that the reason for my being and the reason for One Earth to exist is to make sure that their education counts, that they don't have to start over. And a lot of not only the students themselves, but those that are trying to help them might be very well intentioned, but they might also have the assumption that they have to start over, and they might advise them to take the GED, for instance, in order to get into college. And that's not always necessarily the case. So, you know, the GED sort of as a replacement for someone who didn't finish high school or doesn't have their documents, it might be a good option for some folks, but it might not be necessary either. And it might be an extra hurdle for someone to jump through or to jump over, I guess. It's, you know, the cost of it, the time of it, and it's a test that is specifically designed for US students. So it may not be very easy for someone who has just arrived here from Syria or Afghanistan or Somalia. The insufficient or lack of documentation is sort of what we're going to focus on, because that, you know, is something that's kind of most pertinent to the work of credential evaluation and the admissions part of the process. And oops. Some of those specific documentation challenges include interrupted education. So your applicant may have needed to flee before finishing, or might have needed to stop going to school, you know, for a certain number of a certain amount of time. Their school might have closed, and so education might not have been available to them for a certain amount of time. So they don't have a complete set of credentials. They never reach that sort of benchmark credential that's needed. They might have attended a refugee school or a temporary school, something that's set up by the UNHCR. And so the credentials may not look like credentials that you would typically receive from either that home country or the host country, right? They may only have unofficial documentation. I think this one, is the most common thing I've seen, where someone might have just a scan or a photocopy or something, unofficial to present. So they have something, but it may not be, an original or an official document. It might be poor quality, might not be able to verify it. And then the other circumstance that some find themselves in is they've left with the clothes on their back and they may not have any documents to show at all. So that's, maybe a very difficult situation if you're dealing with absolutely nothing. So there are a lot of resources that Zach's going to go through sort of at the end of the presentation that you can take with and review on your own time as well. But what we've done is kind of distill and consolidate all of these sort of various toolkits and references and resources that are out there that are guides to being able to assess refugee and other displaced persons' credentials in a creative way or in a non-traditional way if you don't have all of the information that you need. So these next steps will kind of serve as a guide, things that you might want to use or try, or things that you might want to incorporate in your practice. But again, as I was saying at the beginning, each one of these is going to be sort of case by case. And so apply them as needed or as you can. So the step one is to assess the overall situation. So what do you need and what do you have? What's missing? And what are the circumstances that prevent the student from being able to get their academic documents or be able to prove their academic background? So just kind of, figuring out what it is that you need and what it is that the student has or doesn't have. And then you can start to fill in the missing pieces and reconstruct their academic history. So this is going to be most often kind of qualitative information if you don't have the actual physical documents, or a lot of quantitative information. So you might want to conduct an interview or obtain like an affidavit, a written timeline or statement from the student, which kind of goes through their academic history and talks about, where they were educated, when they were educated, what credentials they received. And then, of course, request all available documents, even if they're incomplete or unofficial, just to be able to piece it together. It might take a little bit of research and legwork, but there are a lot of really good resources out there. Education USA, offices, Department of State or embassies can help. Ministry of Education, if they're functioning. A lot of this really depends on the country and what's currently happening. So if you're working with someone who is fleeing a country that is currently in crisis, you may not be able to access some of this information. But if it's if the credentials are from several years ago or the country has stabilized, things might be functioning again. So it really just depends on the situation. One of the, I think, most important resources here is colleagues and credential evaluation professionals. If you have a document and you're not able to verify it and you're not sure exactly what you're looking at or whether you can treat this document as authentic to the best of your ability, a colleague or a credential evaluation professional might have an example credential or several example credentials that you can compare with the document you have. So you can at least have some reassurance that this is the format, this is the signature of the person that's supposed to be signing this. This is kind of what the document should look like. So that's sometimes really helpful. And I've used that myself. I'll have a couple of examples I can show you in just a few slides. I also wanted to just point out, I don't have an example of this because this just happened a couple of days ago and I forgot to add it, but I am working with a student from Myanmar who, because of sanctions, is not able to mail their documents or get the documents to me, but I suggested that they contact Education USA advisor to ask if they can help. And the Education USA advisor was incredibly helpful and reviewed the documents that the student brought in and compared them with what they were supposed to look like, and sort of worked with me to give me assurance that, the documents that the student presented to them are authentic to the best of their knowledge and ability. And so I think that that's a really helpful resource too. There's other things that you can do to sort of be creative. Some schools might have a graduation list that they have published, or something in the news. If it's somebody who is applying to a graduate program or a professional program, or maybe was a professional in their home country, has a doctorate or a medical degree, for instance, they might have a LinkedIn profile. There might be scholarly publications. You might be able to find a thesis repository, something like that. Even if they don't have the credentials, you can somehow verify that they were legitimately a student at that institution, or have the qualifications that they say they do. So then the next step would be, once you have that information, to evaluate, assess competencies as needed. So part of that might be giving placement tests, a skills assessment, maybe an interview by a faculty member, or a special project to determine that they are eligible, that they are qualified, that they have the set of skills or the sort of, benchmark knowledge that they should or say they do. And then ultimately, you just have to make a decision. Are they eligible? Are they likely to succeed? And what support might be needed for them at your institution? So, sometimes you have to make a decision that is based on, not all the factors that you would like to have, or that you might need for other applicants. I think as long as you document the decision-making process to make sure that it's consistent when you work with others in the future, and that you have a reasoning and rationale for your decision, then I think that that's the most important thing. And so take these and use them at your institution. If you don't already have policies and procedures in place for working with refugees or displaced persons, or really anyone with credentials that are incomplete or inaccessible, or unofficial, I think, now is the time. And so seek out, the resources that we gave you here. Talk to other institutions to find out what their policies are, and just make sure that you set up fair and consistent policies, and that you communicate it clearly to the applicants, and that you document it internally as well, so that between other staff members or departments, that the process is clear, so that you can best help those applicants. Okay, in the interest of time, I know I said that we were going to discuss, and we want to, and we will leave a little time at the end to hear what's happening at your institutions and what questions you have. But I want to just be mindful of the time and get through a few more slides that we have. So I'm just going to zip through. This is an example I have from Afghanistan. And Melanie, I see that you're on the call. I emailed you. I don't know if you got my email, but I'm asking forgiveness instead of permission, I guess, to use this. This was something that Melanie from UW-Platteville sent me a month or so ago, working with a student from Afghanistan. And so thank you for this example, Melanie. If you don't mind, I'm using it. So this is someone who has an incomplete study, was not able to finish their studies, and Melanie was hoping to get information about their program of study, and specifically kind of their course descriptions and things. So the university website, as of the last time I checked, was not functioning. However, if you haven't used Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, it's amazing. And most of the time, you can go back and find previous archived versions of websites. So if you're looking for a website for, a school or a Ministry of Education or an exam board or something that's not operating, go try Wayback Machine. You can go back and find archived pages of that site and hopefully find information that you need. Here's another example from Afghanistan of a secondary school certificate. And this was one that I had come across my desk. The one on the left was the one I received, and only had a scan of it and wanted to try to verify it. And the usual verification channels were not working at the time. So I reached out to colleagues and asked if anyone had an example of a secondary school certificate from this time frame. So specifically someone who graduated in 2010 and the certificate was issued in 2019, which is what this was, because I wanted to compare the font, the format, the signatures to make sure that it was consistent with other credentials that were issued at that same time. And so I received a response from a colleague here in the US and one in Sweden with 2 example credentials. And if you just take a second to look and see what might be different, which one of these is not like the other, if you turn your attention to the lower left corner, specifically the signature, one of my colleagues, Peggy Bell Hendrickson of Transcript Research, who is like sort of this genius woman who is very detail oriented and has like amazing resources, was able to point out and share with me that the signature appears to be that of this woman who didn't become acting Minister of Education until June of 2020. She was a school principal in 2018 and 2019. So this document was issued in 2019. So the signature should not have been hers. It should have been someone else's. And then she also gave me this list of ministers of education in Afghanistan and the dates that they were in office. So this was extremely helpful to me in the sense that it sort of validated my concerns that this was probably not an authentic document, although it's sort of that really uncomfortable limbo area where, you know, I'm pretty sure that it's not authentic, but I can't prove it because I haven't actually received a response from Afghanistan yet to say definitively this is not authentic. So, and it also doesn't feel good, right? I mean, you know, it's sort of, it's satisfying in a way to, you know, like put that puzzle together and like see these clues and say, aha, this doesn't look right. But it's actually, if you think about the human behind it, it doesn't feel good, right? So anyway, that's just neither here nor there. Wanted to give you a few examples of Ukraine because this is something that is, you know, really relevant right now. And this is probably the most inquiries that I've gotten in the last 2 weeks were from Ukrainian students. Thankfully, as of the last time I checked, the InfoResource database is functioning. It wasn't for a little while, and now it is again. So this is a really excellent way to be able to verify any academic credential from the Ukraine, high school, bachelor's, master's, specialist, I think all the way through PhD. So any academic credential can be verified. You do need to be able to type in Cyrillic, which I can't necessarily just do, but Google Translate is my friend, and you can go in and in Google Translate, there's a little keyboard that you can pop out that says, you know, that allows you to type in Cyrillic. And also, if you aren't already aware, there's a TISEP at your desk webinar on Ukraine. And Tatiana McKenna, one of Zach's colleagues at ECE, who is from Ukraine, is going to be giving this webinar, and it's free to TISEP members and non-members. TISEP is the Association for International Credential Evaluation Professionals, if you're not aware. So please check that out as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Zach to walk us through some of these resources, and then we'll hopefully have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, so there's a lot of resources. So I'll just kind of point out a few of the ones that I think, you know, you can at your leisure go through all of this stuff. But there is a lot of free things out there from various organizations. Obviously, you know, ECE, we have our e-learning series. We have the Connection, which is the message board is your friend through the connection, and that is a free portion of it. So if you have questions, it's not just our own evaluators on there, it's people from all over the world can ask and answer questions. And it's very similar to the NAFSA community boards that they have. Sometimes there's crossover between that NAFSA's community boards and the connection, but a lot of times there isn't. So it's kind of good to just post stuff all over, including the TISEP gaggle is a great listserv to be part of, where people ask a lot of questions about very specific credential evaluation things. Yeah, I would just go through, sorry, I would just go through these on, you know, and then for Ukraine, similar, there's, you know, the West has a lot of stuff on Ukraine as well as Afghanistan, but there's also your links to the InfoSur's verification tool. Again, there's a couple of different PDF sort of presentations through TISEP. And then, yeah. Okay, projects, research, resources. So these are also, here's some toolkits and some initiatives and programs. So I'll plug ECE Aid because that's what I manage at ECE. That's our initiative where we collect donations, and those donations then are used for free evaluation reports for people, vulnerable people such as refugees. It's really expanded to not just refugees. So if you have any questions, check out our website and then contact me. But yeah, it's our way of helping refugees and other displaced folks get an evaluation report without having to pay for it. The other really, I think the two other ones on here that I like to plug are the last two, the ACRO, Inclusive Admissions Policies Report and Toolkit. I worked on that, and what's great about that is it was we did it back in 2018. It was and it was a variety of people, from students to professors to administrators in the registrar's offices to credential evaluators, and it was a really great team effort where you know, I worked on it. There were people from WES, there were people from ACEI. It was very collaborative in nature, and we came up with a really great report. It's got a lot of these similar sort of guidelines on how to look at different credential evaluation, or how to assess things, but it includes so much more than just that. The toolkit part is really similar to, you know, assessing and how you deal with credentials that are not always what you would like to see. And then the other one, of course, is the UC Davis Article 26 backpack, which that's sort of a cloud platform where students can upload their documents, and then they're safely in a cloud, so that if they have to flee, we can all still access their documents virtually through this secure cloud. And it's open to everybody. It's not just refugees, but it's pushed right now, especially for refugees. And they kind of focus on certain countries. So there's a lot of Syrians in there. There's a lot of people from Rwanda. And I think they just are now getting into Ukraine, because that sort of surprised or shocked everybody. But I mean, you and I can go in there and we can upload our documents as well, because you just never know what's going to happen. But it's a really nice platform, and I would, you know, check it out. What's next? Unique NARIC, they have a really good toolkit as well, but I think that this resource is really great, because get a European kind of feel for it, and how they're dealing with some of these sort of issues, especially, you know, a lot of refugees are ending up in Germany and Sweden and elsewhere, and Poland. So it's kind of good to hear what's going on in Europe. And this toolkit is really it's really thorough on recognizing those qualifications from refugees. Okay, this is a really long list as well, with tons of links, but Wisconsin has a lot going on. The resettlement agencies there, those first 6 organizations, those are the main hubs and organizations that are working to resettle refugees within Wisconsin. A couple of them are a little new because through the last administration, there was a lot because of the cutbacks. There were organizations that had to shut down. There were staff shortages cuts because we were not receiving refugees. And then Afghanistan happened and everyone was short-staffed. So a lot of new stuff has popped up, and there's been a lot of people really trying to connect the dots and help each other out. So like the ECDC in Wausau, that's like a fairly new, I think, organization that's working. I know Catholic Charities for a while in Milwaukee had no refugee services, but now is back because there's such a need for it. And then these community service agencies all over the state, these are all the sort of nonprofits and organizations that work a lot with refugees. They're just not resettlement agencies. So they're helping folks with language acquisition, a lot of things like employment and housing, things like that. So resettlement agencies are doing that, but they need a lot of help. And that's where all these other community organizations kind of fall. But check it out, especially in your area. Stuff is happening, and they all have a lot of these links go to, Amazon wish lists. If they're looking for language classes, like if you can help tutor people or just language, conversation classes, things like that. Everybody is looking for some help. And so if you have some kind of skill like that, or you just want to help out in some way, even just helping people move into their apartments or getting furniture, things like that. All of these organizations have a laundry list of things that they need help with. So, all right.
So thanks, Zach. So I think, the takeaways that we have for you are, ultimately, there's always remember that there's a human, there's a person behind these credentials, behind this piece of paper, behind that GPA, right? And so have compassion, be flexible and creative as possible, utilize all of your resources to try to do what's best for the student, but also maintain the integrity of the process, of your institution. Document the process and the results, and just make sure you practice fairness and consistency, but ultimately, providing a better life and opportunities for these individuals, is something that's essential. And so whatever you can do to help, please do so. So we have our information here, and we have about 10 minutes or so, 5 maybe. We'll stay as long as you want. I welcome you to put a question in chat, but if you want to turn your camera on and take yourself off of mute, and share any stories you might have, ask any questions, talk about your experiences at your institution and how you're handling this. We'd love to hear from you. So we'll open it up.
There's like a million different ways you can help people. And so I always like to hear if you do have something in place, what you're doing, because it could be different than, it's probably different than what we're doing or what some other institution is doing. So
I'm going to stop sharing, but you will have access to these slides. We'll make sure that you get them, so that, especially for all those resources to put in your resource library. So who has a story or a question?
Karin and Zach, Katerina, I have a very personal question. Do you happen to have any resources that are located in Europe, Poland specifically? And the reason I'm asking this is the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, very personal to me for many reasons, but one of them is My cousin is in Poland right now with nothing but photocopies of her credentials as a refugee of the war. She is from Ukraine. And so I know that a lot of resources exist in the United States to help refugees, but I know you're in touch with many colleagues overseas. I know you're part of TICEP, of the TICEP network. Can you share any resources for people who are actually not here right now?
I think the EQPR office in Poland. Yeah, there's one. I can get that information for you, and they're very actively working to assist refugees that are there in Poland. And I think they have regional offices as well. So I think I have a direct email for the person who's in charge of like the quality assurance and recognition in Poland. So what they do essentially is kind of like what we do as credential evaluators, but for anyone coming in for any purpose, right? And so they would be, I think, the ones to reach out to as far as helping to get your cousin's credentials recognized in Poland and then elsewhere throughout Europe. So yeah, I'll email you that information. I'll just have to look it up, but I just created a database of EQPR contacts, and I know that I have one for Poland and potentially even a name and specific email address. So I'll get that to you.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And I always like to poke around and find things, so I can look around and see if there's anything else going on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Are people seeing, applicants are getting inquiries or, from, it doesn't have to be Afghanistan or Ukraine. I mean, we could have talked about this for a week, right? Like there's just so many, so many people and countries, but these were just sort of the two that are most prevalent, I guess, right now. But does anyone, are people seeing things? I just had my evaluated my first credential from a student who was in the middle of university in August of 2021 and fled Afghanistan. And luckily his school was still functioning and they were able to send the documents, so it wasn't an issue. But yeah, I've received, at least daily, multiple times a day, inquiries from students from Ukraine right now. So anyone else seeing kind of an uptick in inquiries or credentials applicants?
So I can just share, and I'd be intrigued to know how many other people are seeing college transcripts from Afghanistan. But we have 6 humanitarian parolees coming in from Afghanistan in fall. And we were informed by the State Department, there were 3, their siblings actually, we cannot contact the schools overseas. We cannot ask anything. But I'm just wondering how, if you can't get syllabi and everything, like, and we're being very creative in awarding credit, but if other people are having that same experience, we're just spending a lot of time on these students, which isn't a problem. We want to, and we want to make sure they're successful. But just if anyone has any tips or tricks for evaluating transfer credit or trying to give these students credit, because I'm just wondering if anyone has a way to speed up what we're doing.
You make a really good point though, too, Melanie, about, sometimes it's not just that, that you can't access the university, but that you would put the students, safety in jeopardy, right? So you shouldn't or can't.
I think, that's, because at ECE, we will accept, I mean, we even pre-crisis, we were still accepting photocopies and scans from Afghanistan because we would verify everything with the university. But yeah, we never ever wanted to put anybody in danger or put somebody's family in danger. And so and I know we reach out a lot to EdUSA. One of the advisors, he is actually had to flee and is in Pakistan, but he's still like, he's still answering questions and with whatever resources he has at his disposal, because he has I mean, obviously there's quite a few Afghan refugees in Pakistan, But he's still answering emails. So I can forward you his email, but I don't know if, I know Lindsay's on this call, but I don't see anybody else who, Robin, they haven't put you in Afghanistan yet. But we're still getting some, I think, verifications back from Afghanistan. It just really depends on the university and if somebody's still there to answer the emails. It's really hit or miss.
I think as far as the, because I think what you're looking for, right, is like course descriptions. You're trying to figure out how to transfer the credit, and like how it would be. I mean, I think, if you have reaching out to colleagues, because a lot of other evaluators and a lot of like larger universities that have transfer credit offices or articulation agreements, they might have an archive of like the syllabi or of, something that you can go on. You might be able to use the Wayback Machine to try to find information about that program. But I think reaching out to colleagues and putting something out on either the ACE message board, the Connection, or the TISEP Gaggle to see if anyone has any old syllabi. You never know. I mean, people keep all kinds of stuff, and have access to it. So even if it's not exact, right? Like if it's not the same year or the same curriculum exactly, you might be able to at least get information about some of the courses that you are hoping to be able to transfer anyway, like math or science, just to see kind of what the content might have been, right? So if it's, basic algebra, or if it's like differential equations, you know what I mean? So I think otherwise, placement tests, some sort of assessment, skills assessment from the departments, and then, just kind of making your best guess or giving them at least some elective credit or something that would count towards their overall credits for graduation, even if it's not something specific that you can give them, just to be able to, so that they don't have to start completely over, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to, we have still been getting some correspondence from universities there, but again, it's going to be hit or miss. But I second Karin's suggestion of just reaching out to colleagues and like posting on boards. I'm surprised at some of like the very specific questions people have, and that there is actually like a response to it, that like someone, has a course description from like 1984, like who knows, like, yeah. So it's really helpful to do that and just reach out to colleagues, because you never know, someone might have had it at some point, or at least they might have a suggestion, at least in terms of, credit transfer and things like that. So
the other thing, Melanie, you could do is, you could reach out to the university to ask for syllabi or like their program description or course descriptions without naming the student, right? You don't have to like specifically put the student's name or information or even supply those credentials. It could be a generic or a more general question, like, if you find an email for the department at the university and say, do you have a syllabi or a prospectus or something, that you can share with me so that I can learn more about the courses required for this program. And they might have something that is sort of in the deeper recesses of the internet that you can't find, and maybe it's all in Pashto or another language, but you could translate it if you have something. So yeah, reaching out to the university to ask without compromising the identity of the students is also a possibility, if you just ask a more general question about the curriculum. Anyone else? I know we're a little past our time and there's a 3 o'clock, so you have our contact information too. So if you have any questions or any follow-up or need any other resources, please feel free to reach out, and we're happy to do our best to help. And again, we'll get the presentation to you as well so that you have access to all those links and resources. Okay.
All right. I just want to reiterate something that one of our colleagues had said yesterday in the roundtable kind of about this, that she was kind of surprised that their Office of Veteran Affairs, like on campus, like was very willing to like help the refugees that were coming to campus, and she wasn't necessarily expecting that for help and as a resource. So you might be surprised at the individuals and offices on your campus that are willing to help out these students. So,
and if I could piggyback off that, Lindsay, I was just at ACRO and for a day, but we talked a lot about sort of connecting those dots and how do everybody's working on all of these different great things, but sometimes we get siloed in our own little bubbles. And so how do we connect those? And I think one of my more recent experiences of that was I went to a networking brunch at the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Association. That organization has nothing to do with higher ed. But I went to it because the speaker was interesting, and it was loosely related to helping find employment and careers and some education for their students, or for the people that they serve. But ultimately, it really had nothing to do with higher ed. But then I spoke with some people, and now I have a card for an immigration lawyer that I never would have heard about, who's helping refugees in Milwaukee. Language translation services. If you do get something in Pashto or something, and you have no idea, reaching out to organizations that might not necessarily within your local community, that might not necessarily be related to your or have any association with your university or college. They're all willing to help, and then they know about you and what you're working on. So yeah, it's a lot of trying to just kind of, I hate saying thinking outside of the box. It's cliche, but it really is. It's finding those connections that you might not have thought about in the past for like a standard student.